D-Day. Blue on blue. Friendly fire. There are times in war when your friends can be as dangerous as your enemies. Not even President Roosevelt was safe from friendly fire. During World War II, when bombing was inaccurate and communications between air and ground forces were poor, mistakes often happened. All Allied aircraft had invasion stripes painted on them to identify them as friendly. Even so, nervous anti-aircraft gunners made flying over the fleet very dangerous indeed. 14th of November 1943, President Roosevelt was on board the battleship USS Iowa on his way to the Tehran Conference. During the exercise, the escorting destroyer USS William D. Porter accidentally launched a torpedo straight at the president's ship. Radio silence delayed informing the USS Iowa, barely in time. She turned sharply and the torpedo detonated in her wake. Roosevelt was a Democrat, and as a result of the incident, US ships would greet the William D. Porter with, "Don't shoot, we're Republicans." 6th of June 1944, D-Day. As paratroopers were landing, the RAF were bombing Merville Battery. The bombs missed their target, falling amongst the paratroopers of the 6th Airborne Division, killing 78 and wounding 65. Bombs were dropping all around the men, cows were being blown to pieces. Brigadier James Hill and a small group of 30 paratroopers were marching along a path through waterlogged fields when they heard the sound of aircraft approaching and then the noise of bombs exploding. He shouted for his men to take cover and dived down next to Lieutenant Peters. There were huge explosions. He felt a searing pain in his backside. He had been hit. He could smell death and cordite. There were dead and wounded everywhere, and next to him a leg. For a moment he thought it was his, but it had on a brown boot. His boots were black. It was the leg of Lieutenant Peters, who lay dead next to him. Only 2 of the 30 men managed to get to their feet and continue to the rendezvous point. Before leaving, they took the morphine from the dead and gave it to the wounded. As they left, the injured men gave them a cheer. Paid with the blood of thousands of airmen, the Allies had gained dominance of the skies. Following D-Day, fighter bombers roamed the skies looking for targets of opportunity. Later in the day of the 6th of June, the airborne HQ staff was strafed near Pegasus Bridge, killing 15 and wounding many more. A chateau being used as brigade headquarters was strafed and a pregnant woman walking in the gardens was hit and killed. During Operation Cobra, US Air Force bombed their own front line, killing many US troops, including Chief of US Ground Forces Lieutenant General Leslie McNair. It was Lieutenant General Omar Bradley's plan to use bombers to blow a 5-kilometre long by 2-kilometre wide hole through the enemy lines. To take advantage of this, US troops had to be close to the German lines to advance immediately, exploiting the shock of the bombardment. 24th of July 1944. Visibility was poor and some bombers were recalled, but others continued. The 30th Infantry Division were bombed by mistake, with 25 American soldiers killed and 131 wounded. The following day, 1,500 bombers dropped 3,300 tons of bombs. The fighter bombers dropped their bombs right on target, but a breeze blew the dust towards the Americans. There was no radio link between the ground and planes to inform the bombers. The following heavy bombers began to drop their bombs short, killing 111 US soldiers and wounding 490. The attack did, however, devastate the enemy. Panzer Lehr lost 2/3 of its men and all its tanks. On the day following the bombing, the Americans advanced 4,000 yards. On the second day, they advanced 8,000 yards. And on the third day, the US 2nd Armored Division broke through into open country. During Operation Totalize, 8th of August 1944, the Polish Armored Division and the Canadian Armored Division were waiting west of the Falaise Road to move forward following the bombing. 500 B-17 bombers attacking targets along the front were broken up by heavy flak. Many dropped their bomb loads off target amongst the Canadians and Poles. The Canadians and Poles marked their positions with yellow smoke, not knowing the Americans had marked their bombing zone with yellow smoke. The 3rd Canadian Infantry Division and the 1st Polish Armoured Division suffered 65 killed and 250 wounded. 14th of August 1944, Operation Tractable. At the same time as the Allied Air Force carpet bombed the enemy front lines, Allied tanks advanced through a thick smoke screen laid by artillery shells. Most of the 888 RAF bombers hit their target, but 77 dropped their bombs on Canadian and Polish troops who were at the rear, waiting to advance. Again, the troops on the ground put up yellow smoke, but incredibly, the Air Force was still using yellow smoke to mark the bombing zone. The Canadians and Poles suffered 490 casualties, including 112 dead. 265 vehicles, 30 field guns and 2 tanks were also destroyed. 19th of August 1944. The South Alberta Regiment came under fire 6 times by RAF Spitfires who failed to recognise vehicle markings and smoke signals. The chaplain, Captain Silcox, ran through the fire of strafing aircraft to retrieve a Union Jack and climbing onto a vehicle waved it furiously. The Spitfires dived on the column again, but this time buzzed it without firing. The South Alberta Regiment suffered 57 friendly fire casualties. During the Normandy campaign, the Allies suffered 206,000 casualties. Some of these were from friendly fire. Thanks to the courage and sacrifice of these men, Europe was liberated.